Hey, Cori Cotner.
Hey, Mark. How are you?
Good, good. Welcome to the Mindset Factory.
I am so excited to be here.
Yeah, we build some mindsets here.
That is fantastic.
That's some good, some bad. You never know.
I mean, you can't be picky.
No, you can't be picky. We just build them.
Right, exactly.
Mass production of mindsets.
There's always, one or two throwouts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what are we going to talk about today?
I think we're talking about leadership.
Yeah.
And a model of leadership, right? Or the phases of leadership.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So just to give a little context, though, talk a little bit about what you do, kind of, where your leadership has gone over the years. Just kind of give the audience a sense of Cori Cotner.
Okay, perfect. So currently, I serve the East Lycoming School District as the Director of Curriculum and Instruction. This is my 8th year. I say that, I know, just because I continued all of in-service in August. I'm like, so my 7th year. And then on my way home that day, I was like, wait, 17, 18, 19. And I was like, oh, wait, it's my 8th year. So time does fly when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, and you're not teaching math anymore.
Right,
so
exactly. So I started my career in the classroom, and I taught for 10 years, and had some really great teachership opportunities in the classroom to present at conferences and those kind of things. And after being in the classroom, I left for an opportunity at an intermediate unit as a professional development coordinator. And I was in that role for about 3.5 years, and then became the director of the Division of Educational Planning. And so I was there until 2016.
Which is where we met.
It is where we met.
Well, no,
we met in the classroom.
We're getting old, so we're slipping.
Can't even remember. It's been so long.
Way back when.
I know, because I actually served on a panel not too long ago, and it was at my alma mater, and so it was an alumni panel, and I'm like, well, I'm the only one here that's graduated in the 1900s.
Oh.
It was just so bizarre to me to think about that.
Yeah.
While I was at the IU, though, I had a lot of really great opportunities to work on some statewide leadership teams, on some pretty neat projects across a lot of different topics and various, projects that the department had going on. In 2016, when I left the IU, I actually went to work in Harrisburg at the Department of Ed. I was a consultant for them during the writing of Pennsylvania's response to the federal Every Student Succeeds Act. So that was a different kind of leadership work because it was so dependent on legislation and the bureaucracy that exists in that. So it was a very, very different feel. So I traded that 90-minute commute in for my 3-minute commute that I have now to East Lycoming. So that's a little bit about where I've been and the journey that got me here today.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and we've done some really amazing projects together. Our work at the IU, and also in your role at East Lycoming, which it kind of made me think about why we should have this conversation. And I'll share a little bit about that past project. But today, I thought I'd love to hear your thoughts on some work that we do. One of the challenges we have is bringing really big topics into really clarity for organizations. And so when organizations come to Mindset, they typically have kind of larger things that they're wishing, needing to solve. And it's up to us to really bring something simple, something that they can really wrap their minds and hearts around, so that they, at the end of the experience, that we don't just leave them without tools to move forward and build capacity on their own. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about the big challenges ahead of time. And one of the challenges that we consistently see across organizations is this idea of leadership. And you and I have talked about this a lot, that leadership is in everybody. Everybody has a leadership role.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so it's not a question of whether or not you have the title of leader. What we find is we're trying to instill, because this is what the organizations are asking us for help on, it's instilling certain mental models and mindsets in their organizations. And this one being on leadership. And, we started talking about wow, we consistently even have spent a lot of time on leadership talking about leaders, certain things that they do, the what's of leadership. So, and a lot of these things I think will resonate with you. Like a leader is responsible kind of for fostering vision, right? We've done a lot of work around vision, and you could also say mission, but maintaining culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. We've used phrases like kind of like culture police. It sounds really serious, but ensuring shared mental models, like across the board, like ensuring that those mental models are there. And then the storytelling piece, which I think is fascinating, right? It's making sure that the stories that are told about your organization are consistent or maybe true.
Or both.
Or both, right?
Consistently true.
If they're consistently true. Yeah, because we know that, our communities will form stories about our organization, whether we tell them or not. And the goal of a leader is to make sure that those stories are really reflective of the reality of that organization. So we talk about that as a what? Championing. We'll have to check to see if that's a word.
I don't even know, but I know what you mean.
Right. The people, right? Really raising people up and making sure that people see their role in an organization and not just by job title. And I like the phrase creating a fan base. I don't know, so but these are things that actually it's kind of interesting to talk about. There's a podcast on each one of these, really. But the reason I'm mentioning these is because these are the things that we typically see that are talked about or are part of trainings, leadership. And the last couple, I think, like fiscal agency and then building community. So I assume, like as you think about leadership, that you've have participated in sessions that have been covering some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting about those is, and I wanted to make sure I came back. So there's absolutely the vision mission piece. Like you have to really know where you want to end up, or at least in because you have to change that after you reach that point. You've got to you've got to shift things out and decide what's next. And
it doesn't last forever.
No, it doesn't last forever, and it changes. And so those. Knowing what the vision is and communicating that vision so that everybody has a shared model of what that looks like. And then the mission work, the stuff that we do every single day to make sure that we are getting to that vision is so important. And I think so the shared mental model is important. And then when you talked about telling the stories, like we're in a situation right now in our district where we've identified and we've talked about the vision and the mission for a long time now. Okay. And we're starting to tell stories. We're starting to be able to tell success stories about our journey. But it's interesting because when we said, it has to be consistent and it has to be true, the truth in those stories is sometimes different for everybody based on their perspective. Right. So it's really important to continue to have conversations around that and to continue to talk about it so that you make sure that the mental model is still lining up with what you want to do. Yeah. Because it may look very different for a pre-K teacher than it does for an 11th grade teacher who's teaching AP Calc. Yeah. And so...
And it probably should.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
It should. But maintaining consistent tenets of that vision. Yes. So one of the ways that I've found that we're really framing and telling the story is around a collective set of core beliefs. Yeah. Because people can relate to those a little bit better than, our vision is this.
The big thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, gotcha.
So that's how we're trying to weave those core beliefs into our story and make sure that everybody understands what that's about and what that means to them. And that's where the perspective and the differences come in occasionally, like how they relate to that, not how it relates to the vision or mission itself. Yeah. And I think what's fascinating about that work is that as champions of the vision and fostering the vision is that what leaders do is make sure that those differing perspectives I mentioned a while ago, it probably should be. Well, we're all different. That's why we're going to have different perspectives on those. But that those different perspectives don't creep into trying to shift it and making the vision into kind of like
something it isn't. That's why we have to be really purposeful about communicating what the vision is, having that consistent shared mental model, what the vision is, because we all know the phrase, like every organization has a vision.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? If it's not written down, then everybody's perspective on the vision is the reality of that organization.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this person thinks that this is what we're aiming to do, and this person thinks this is what we're doing.
Well, and I think ironically, I think sometimes, and I think we'll talk about this a lot a little bit later, but the culture of your organization takes a beating in that process sometimes.
Sure does. Yeah.
Because you've, as you start to tell stories and as you, rally around core beliefs and you're battling those perspectives in fierce conversations around that on a regular basis, it starts to facet off a little bit sometimes. And so your culture sometimes takes a beating, particularly if your vision and mission requires a level of accountability that hasn't been there for a while.
Yeah. And I think this is a good point where doing that work, as you talked about how you're working to establish a shared mental model and creating a consistent story, it's work that really requires us to be, mentally, cognitively well, right, in order to kind of continue to do that work. And I think this is a good segue into those are the things we often see in leadership programs and we talk about in leadership. And what we don't talk as much about in leadership is the individual who's navigating that leadership journey, the person, right? The person who's on a daily basis tackling vision and culture and budget and strategy and community and right? And how we have to navigate that kind of game and that journey along the way. And so this is where the complexity comes into the work we're doing, and we're kind of crafting this idea to kind of explore with you today, but it's this idea of kind of the three states of leadership. And we observe and we can kind of see these in nature. And so anyway, I want to present the kind of three states. And the one is staying in the game. So as a leader, if I'm doing all of those things or one of those things throughout either every minute of the day or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, even on a yearly basis, there's this state of me being a leader and staying in the game, right? And doing that work and really pushing forward and remaining in the moments, right? And really like responding and acting and guiding. That's what it means to be like staying in the game. And I'm just curious to know from your perspective, your impression of how staying in the game can be affect you as a leader, right? Is staying in the game a state that you can relate with? Like, it's kind of like, I find myself like thinking, some days I'm waking up and I'm just thinking, today I got to stay in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think, first of all, yes, I can totally relate to that. And it's I think it's what separates, like you said earlier, there's leadership in every position, in every organization. Just it maybe takes a different turn here or there. It looks a little bit different. But one of the things when you're talking about vision mission is that like laser focus on the goal.
Yeah.
And so staying in the game does feel like a constant push sometimes. Like it's a high adrenaline, high energy, sometimes high pressure push to stay really laser focused to make sure that every decision we make is this vision worthy? Like, is it related to the mission of the work that we do every day?
Right.
And so when you're doing that on a fairly regular basis, it's sometimes like we often say around the leadership table, like when we have our leadership meetings, let's just take a pause.
Right.
Like, let's just take a pause because we're in it to win it, but that takes a toll.
Yes.
It takes a toll on leaders. And I think one of the things that is maybe not a perspective that when you're viewed in a leadership position in an organization, not necessarily that everyday leadership that we see, but when you're viewed from that, you have all of those facets that we talked about.
Yeah.
We talked about, moving towards a vision. We talked about maintaining the culture. We talked about working on the mission and, gaining fans and, kind of keeping the momentum. And you have all of those pieces that you've got to think about on a regular basis. So when someone's unhappy, someone in the organization is unhappy about, maybe a change that we're going to make or something we're going to implement that changes their daily routine. They don't have all those. They don't have the whole puzzle together. You know what I mean? They're responsible to just put the edges together. The flat sides. They've just got to put the flat sides together. Yeah. And you've got to figure out how to do all of this other stuff. So, sometimes it's easy to forget that not everybody sees the whole picture. Right. And so it's really necessary to pump the brakes sometimes. And that's hard to do when you feel as though maybe you're on a timeline or you really want to be able to, I hate to say check off the boxes because I don't, we've talked before. There's a huge difference between compliance and leadership. Right. And, there certainly are compliance things that you have to take care of. Yeah. But the leadership is what makes your organization grow. Yeah. So.
Well, and I think the interesting thing you started going down this pipeline is like, what does the community expect? Like, and community can be defined here by the staff. It can define in your case as literally the community since you're in education. We think as leaders that our job is to be always on, always staying in the game. Now, I think most of us who most leaders kind of recognize you need something else, and you can call it a lot of different things. And that's why for us, we had to think about, well, if a state is being in the game, the question becomes, what are other states that allow us to be still in our leadership role, but to actually take a little different state and a little different perspective? So those two states are, a lot of times when we're in the game, we're in the game and in the game and in the game and in the game so much, there's going to be a moment when something comes into the game and it really kind of causes us a hiccup, or it causes us a little point of stress, or it causes us a little bit of change of pace. And so it's in those moments where we look at two positive states, although when I say these things, people are going to be like, oh, these sound really negative, but retreat and isolation. And we've taken clues from nature, right? And so, and one day literally we were watching outside our office and there were birds on the line, and it was kind of hilarious because there were like 10 birds down here and like 1,000 birds down at the other end of the line. And one of the big hawks came in, of course, and came to, at the 10 birds, and the 10 birds took this moment of retreat, right? They just kind of like scattered, and they kind of followed what they knew to do. And it was really interesting. You could watch them all, and they moved over, and they all came over to the line with like the 1,000 birds. And the 1,000 birds like never moved because the hawk had kind of flown off. The 1,000 birds saw the other 10 birds or whatever, and they kind of welcomed them to the line, and everybody found their place on the line. And pretty soon they're all like squinching up a little bit more. And it made us think that like there is that state of retreat, which we know is also a wartime tactic of retreat that is incredibly positive. And it means what? And so I'm curious to know from your perspective, as you think about those moments where you're in the game and you had that moment of where, you as a team said we need to pause, how do you think that idea, that concept, that mental model of retreat plays out for you all as a leader and as your leadership team?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and I think it's important to make that distinction from the negative connotation of retreat. Yeah. Because I'll be absolutely honest with you. When we talked about it the first time, I'm like, retreat? Right. I'm not surrendering. You know what I mean? I'm going for the prize.
I'm in the game.
So, yeah. Right. So I think what's important is oftentimes, so our current leadership team, under the leadership of our superintendent right now, had a lot to accomplish. Mm-hmm. The organization prior to that was not in a state that it was ready for change, or that it didn't have the right conditions for change to happen. It's just a nice way of saying what I'm thinking.
We do that.
But at the same time, we had a lot to accomplish, so we've done this from my perspective. I think we've retreated periodically in this process because when you feel like you've got a lot of plates that you're going to try to keep spinning on the end of a pole, I think sometimes it is necessary to be like, okay, wait. Yeah. We've got a lot of initiatives going on. We've got a lot of things that are moving us toward our vision. But are we doing each of those with some fidelity and integrity? Mm-hmm. And are we doing it in a way that we're giving attention to the right things? Right. Because you can give a lot of attention to the compliance things that need to be done, but it has nothing to do in moving you towards your vision. Yeah. So I think that retreating to kind of let's just take a minute to make sure that our focus is on the right place, and let's refresh our thought process about what steps need to be accomplished. And then let's also take some time to re-energize. Yeah. We re-energize by looking at, let's look what we've accomplished already. Yeah. It looks like there's a whole lot of things to do until we get to the finish line, but let's take a moment and let's really kind of pat ourselves on the back for what has been accomplished. Yeah. Let's also take some time to pat the backs of the people who have are in the trenches doing the work, to get this done, and those moments of retreating have, I think, not only re-energized our work that we do every day, but it's also given the rest of the organization a moment to be like, oh, wait, they are thinking about us too. Like, we're driving pretty hard and we're making some pretty significant changes and we're asking a lot of you, and maybe more than's been asked of you in a long time. Yeah. But when you do take that moment to retreat, and it's and you can look at it really as this moment to kind of rally the troops again and move in make sure we're moving in the right direction. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. It's almost like this idea of these micro rests, right? Micro retreats, right? I think our colleague Derek Cabrera spoke recently. I heard him talk about this understanding, like when you're climbing a mountain, that you would take these very slow, purposeful steps as you gain altitude and weather is really cold. And he mentioned about how he practices actually taking these micro rests, right? It almost in between steps, and these moments where your weight is very supported by your skeleton. I think is the way he described it. So, Derek, if you're listening, I'm quoting you, but not, right? So you correct me. And it's kind of interesting here. It's almost like on a daily basis, right? I think that's one of the things I think is important to know is that as a leader, you may have to take these almost hour by hour or even minute by minute little retreats. And it's an okay place to be. Yeah. Right? You should give yourself permission to do it. And in all honesty, we've started to schedule them. And we've not referred to them as retreats, but that's what they end up being. Yes. So on Thursday afternoons at 1:00, we bring the leadership team together and we're like, okay, let's talk about, what do you have on your plate right now that you need support from this group? Yeah. What have you moved off your plate that you want to celebrate? And what do we need to do as a community of leaders to help each other get to the next step? Yeah. Like, is our focus, are we maintaining focus? Yeah. Because it doesn't matter what kind of organization it is, whether it's education or industry or the health, the medical field, there are a lot of distractors. Yeah. So that's another reason why I think the retreat is so important. Yeah, I agree. It's that time for creating new connections that you aren't seeing when you're in the game, right? When we're in the game, we are literally so focused on specific outcomes we're trying to bring about or specific actions. We almost can't see these other opportunities coming at us to say, hey, this is a resource that you could tap into. It's like, no, I'm in the game, right? Yeah. It's like that idea of like if you've got the ball and you're running with the ball, and you really depend on your team to fend off the other people because your job is to stay in the game, right? Exactly. You don't want to get sideswiped. You don't get sideswiped. 250-pound linebacker. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So. It's really interesting. It's like that's how it's showing up for you. How it's showing up for you is like being purposeful about these retreat moments.
but not to the point where we define retreat as kind of like, let's get together and just like waste time or.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right? Yeah.
We refer to them as stand-up meetings.
Oh, yeah.
That you don't really have time to sit down because you're not going to be there that long.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just kind of a around the circle, like tell me what you need, tell me where you are, tell me what what you're excited about.
Yeah.
And when we first started them, we had a little different format. So we're like, let's give everybody shout outs. Like who can, and we're like, this is taking too much time and it's a waste of time. Like as a leadership team, we don't, that's not typically the way that we operate. Yeah, exactly. So, and if one of the principals does something that they always do really great things, but I just reach out and say, hey, I really appreciate you. So I don't need time during the week, during that time that we're supposed to re-energize and refresh and make sure that we are focused to do that kind of, I hate to say it, like kumbaya stuff.
Totally. I think that's absolutely right. It's like being purposeful about the interactions, right? It's kind of, again, let's look back at nature. When the birds retreat over to the line and they're coming there to do their rest and they're joining forces with a lot bigger flock to fend off that now the hawk has a much bigger flock to look at, right? They're being very purposeful about that.
Yes.
And not that they could, but we don't just watch all the birds gather on the ground and have a little chit chat.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. They've got a job to do.
Yeah, they've got a job.
It's a matter of survival for them, and that, and those like leadership touch points are very different than the days that we set aside for leadership development. Were professional, for professional growth.
Yeah.
And it's very different, and the purpose is very different. And so, I didn't, until you and I talked about this model, I didn't really think about them as retreats or a moment of retreat, but they absolutely are, because that's how we use those in a way to, just maintain focus, and also make sure that everybody's okay. Yeah. Just check. It's a check-in, really. Yeah. But I do think that it's important to take time to do that. And sometimes when you are driven to stay in the game, and when I think about our team, they're all like looking for the end zone. You know what I mean? Yeah, so it's really important to make that not only a scheduled time, but also very purposeful and be very concise about what that time's for. Yeah,
love it. Yeah. And then we think about this the last state we're going to talk about is isolation. And we'll come back to talking a little bit about how we can practice all three of these states, because at some point we want to get better, at each of these states once we become aware of them. We like through our work in systems thinking, we know that like once you become aware of the patterns of thinking, like you can't forget them.
Right, exactly.
It's like you can't unsee them.
Right.
Right. So we're just walking down the road. Oh, distinction, system, relation. Right. So we feel like we're just
acknowledging our brain for doing what it's designed to do.
Right.
But
congratulations.
It is kind of funny.
But it's the same thing with these models. The intent is we create these models for people so that it's like, oh, I can't unsee this now. So people will start to see, it's like, oh, great, this is a moment where I've selected to stay in the game, and so here's the characteristics, the traits, this is what I'm doing. This is a moment of retreat, and this is what it's about. And it helps us understand that when we choose things to do, we can say, okay, wait a minute, is that helping me stay in the game? Is that helping me retreat? Or in the last one, we talk about isolation. And this is a state oftentimes that that we see gets confused with retreat. So retreating and then isolating are distinct places and states to be for leaders. And I'm curious to know for you, and what's interesting about isolation is that depending on who we talk to, it depends on their personality. And so I'm curious for you if isolation fits into you as a person / leader, because we can't separate the two. I mean, I'm a firm believer in we are us. Right. Right. And so I'm curious to know if isolation resonates with you, how it fits in, does it not? You tell me.
Well, it's interesting. If you would have asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said, I don't like isolation.
I don't like it.
I don't like it because I feel like I need that, like constant feedback from my colleagues and peers. Even maybe 5 years ago. And again, I say that because I feel like the organization was in a little bit of a state of chaos. And so isolation in those situations seems scary because if the organization is chaotic and seems really unfocused, then being by yourself with those thoughts is sometimes like not a great place to be.
It's like the whole organization becomes the hawk.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And so if you're alone,
one bird. And it's probably not going to end well for you. The hawk is going to be very happy. But but I will say, I think it's either maturity in my career or, I keep saying to people, the light at the end of the tunnel is tiny, but I can see it. So I have this very different perspective because it's not a sprint anymore. It's like this marathon to the end. And I know that, I think most leaders want to leave their organization better than they found it. And I just know that that's going to take some time and energy and a me that is at peace and really can validate my actions and my decisions. And sometimes in order to do that, you have to be alone with your thoughts and alone with, you kind of have to just to gain your own clarity about where you are in that process and what your contributions need to be. And so I think sometimes even when, we've always worked in situations where we're surrounded by other people and, sometimes contradictory perspectives or even like perspectives can be, sometimes you're like, gosh, just stop agreeing with me. You know what I mean? Like, let's have some dissonance about.
Yes. Yeah.
But at the same time, I think I've grown to become much more comfortable in isolation and to also see the value. Yeah.
And you are, it depends, again, we're talking about personality types. So, like, for instance, I call myself a socially capable introvert. So I get energy from being alone, and it's there's great resources out there for people to understand, like, what does true introversion mean? There's a difference between being shy and being introverted.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. I was labeled shy when I was a young child, which was a huge misidentification of what I was. I was not shy. I'm an introvert, and so for people who are really like extroverted, and we talk about isolation, their need for isolation time is different, right? It might be shorter. It just might be that that they like to journal, and they like to write. They like to kind of reflect and self-introspection. And for them, if they do it for 10 minutes a day, it's like, I'm done. I don't need this anymore. And on the flip side, you have individuals who kind of go to the other extreme. It's like any time that they remove themselves from the game, they think, right, that the only way for them to exit that is to I just need to go away. I just need to get out of this. I just need, and to a certain degree, they may be true. Problem is if they stay there. Right. Right. And here's where we look at like leaders who then have this contradiction where it's like, boy, that's my natural tendency. Like if I'm not here, I just kind of want to pull out. I want to go and be isolated. And yet society is telling them as a leader, you need to stay in the game. They have this internal conflict, which is hugely significant for them because they like, no, I want to go do this. I need to go do this. But society's telling me I just have to stay in the game, stay in the game, stay in the game. And so, bad habits develop to the point where like they just choose to stay in the game all the time. And they never do come out of the game.
No, and the burnout rate is so high for those folks. Yep. And I think that happens more. I have no, certification to say that I can say this accurately, but at the same time, I think that happens way more with people who are introverted and enjoy their time in isolation. Yes. Because from their perspective, they've got to continue to remind themselves to get back in the game. Get back in the game. Yeah. But in a way that's healthy and makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I was a pretty precocious child, so introvert probably wouldn't have been the way that anybody described me. So I've had to almost train myself. Just like I said, you have to be very purposeful and mindful about selecting times to retreat with your team.
Yep.
I've had to have those times of isolation. And my problem sometimes is getting back in the game too quickly. Like,
Right.
Because I enjoy the game.
Yes. Yeah.
And I get energy from being with other people and thinking that I'm supporting them and thinking that I'm, cheering them on.
Yep.
And therefore, when you do walk away, you're like, wow, I'm really exhausted. I don't have anything left for me,
Yeah.
And so I think I think it depends. So it's really important, I think, to know which one of those people you are so that you can either remind yourself to get back on your horse and get back in the race, or that you can remind yourself that you've got to, take a moment and just breathe.
Yeah.
And I think the piece about that is the length of time that those people, like for me, if I, we have 4 buildings in the district. If I remind myself, I'm like, okay, this feels like a really good time that you should kind of do some self-reflection and just make sure that you're the in it to win it feeling that you have is winning the vision
Right.
and winning and not necessarily to be right. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
And so sometimes just hopping in my car and driving 7 minutes to another building to just, say hi to people that I haven't seen for a week or so
Right.
is all the isolation I need.
Yeah.
Because you can think about that.
Yeah.
I think my superintendent is someone that sometimes is like, hey, I'm working from home tomorrow because I just need to be by myself.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I need to make sure that I'm focused and I need to make sure that I am bringing the right energy to tomorrow. So I've got a couple of virtual meetings and then I'm going to take the afternoon and really kind of reorganize my thoughts. And he's someone that's what he requires. Yeah. I've done that sometimes when I've had projects like a grant to write or something. And by 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, gosh, I just don't.
Yeah.
I should probably just go back to
the
office.
To the game. Yeah. Well, and I think the beauty of the model of these 3 states is that of how it can create conversations where sometimes it's awkward for team members to have these conversations around their roles. And if for instance, we have a team member who's like really struggling with figuring out how to get back in the game, it's hard for them to understand, to articulate it. And it's also easy to judge.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So you've probably seen that.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So we have, I think, a perfect example. We have a brand new principal this year in our largest elementary building. And I'll deny saying this later, but it's
not recorded.
It's probably it's
oh wait a minute.
Yeah, I guess
it is.
I'll be careful who I share it with. How's
okay.
that? It's a building that historically has been tough culturally. Like there's a very different climate in this elementary building than the other 2.
Yeah.
Visibly, like emotionally, like it's just a very different climate. And so we have these leadership stand-up meetings every Thursday at 1 o'clock. And then I'm her mentor. So she comes at 12 and we have a mentor meeting. Then we go right into that, the leadership meeting. And she had a couple weeks that were really tough. And what I started to notice was she would come at 11:30 and then she was coming at 11. And, our stand-up meeting's over like at 1:45. She was staying till 2 and to 2:30, and I'm like, okay. So it just reminded me that okay, she's retreating a little bit in from the perspective of I need to re-energize and recharge. Right. But I may need to check in with her and make sure that she doesn't that she's getting back in the game. So let me help you figure out what to do in isolation.
Yes.
These are the things that you've got to frame in your mind about what you want to do. And then regardless of how tough it is, you got to get back in the game.
Yeah. And it reminds me of this, we mentioned it not confusing the states. And I think you really bring up a good point is that oftentimes we can pretend, or we can kind of think that I'm just retreating because I'm kind of with my peers. I'm kind of in this environment where I am
my mentor.
With my mentor,
Yeah.
right? But the reality is you're kind of treating that retreat as a moment of isolation, because you're not purposely doing the things that we should do, like the regrouping, like the getting other perspectives. You're kind of isolating within that retreat moment. So oftentimes there isn't a clear line in that distinction that we really need people to help make, right?
Right.
There is a relationship between isolation and retreat,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. So one of the things that when I noticed that, I started to have a conversation with her about, the phases and what that might look like and how to use it purposefully. And then I would say to her, so after our leadership meeting today, you're going to go back to your building, and I want you to go talk to 3 people just about random, not work things today. I just want you to go back there and work on connecting with 3 people that maybe you haven't talked to this week, and start to build those relationships and build, connections that. And then it gave her something positive. Like I said, I don't care how many discipline referrals are on your desk. I don't care how many parent phone calls there are. Do that first. Go connect with 3 people first. And then you can do those things. Because that's what was happening. Anytime that you've got a leadership shift in a building, they're going to test the waters just like kids do, So there would be all these things on her desk when she got back, which nobody wants to deal with when you go back for the end of the day. So
that's really good, because I was going to ask this question about how each of these, how we practice them, and I think you covered that really well, right? I mean, it's what you talked about was a very purposeful action, interaction, having those communications, using the model to say, hey, we're going to move you through these states so that we can get you back in the game. But we also want to build that self-awareness of, I'm going to show you some purposeful ways to reconnect in your retreat mode, and then give you that permission to say, this is the time to do the retreat. But then there's kind of this moment of expectation of re-entering the game.
You got to go back to the what.
You know
what I mean?
Yes,
you have to.
The what.
Part of getting back in the game is you've got to go back to the what.
Yeah, the what doesn't go away.
No, so you don't you're not feeling like you have big supporters. So go connect with 3 and build your fan base.
Yes.
Go back and just hey, how was your weekend? You doing anything fun this weekend? Just make it not about work, not about the game. Sometimes you get back in the game without talking about the game.
Yeah. Well, you said earlier about getting back into the game too early, and one of the projects we worked on really early in our mindset work about cognitive wellness was I'm going to talk about the COVID cognitive wellness work that we did, and I think this is also that state where how do leaders think about learning experiences that we can deliver for our organizations. And I think sometimes we think about them external to this idea of retreat or isolation. And I actually don't think we should. I think we should literally say everybody's in the game. And when we can say, hey gang, in order to build our capacity, we do need to take this moment we need to retreat a bit and reconnect. And part of reconnecting can be building new knowledge and building new perspectives, which can be a professional development day, right? And then when we start to see those things in that context, then we start to realize that we can also play around in that learning moment with giving people a chance to be more isolated and rejuvenate themselves, but in the same time also build new connections. And so, you as a professional development professional want somebody who builds that. How do you see that playing out, and maybe the way you think about professional development, for the rest of the year, or even that bigger professional development plan that's multi-year? How does that play out for you in terms of the experiences that you could build for your team?
Yes, actually, you know what? I think in building that out, the best professional development, professional learning that I think that I've delivered over the course of the last 3 years. And I say that because we've had a very specific, concise, laid out professional development plan because of our vision.
Right.
So we've had it very well laid out. I think some of the best days that I've been part of, either developing, delivering, or both, have happened in moments of isolation for me.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
And when I have kind of gotten to that place of peacefulness,
Mm-hmm.
and then also think about where we are, what we've accomplished. Although that happens in that stage of retreat as well. But this is very different because I think about it. I think about the isolation piece as this place of wellness for yourself as a leader. Mm-hmm. And so in those moments, I'm also able to think we've been kind of cracking the whip for the teachers to stay in the game. Mm-hmm. And in those moments, I have been where I've said, well, I know the professional learning plan says we're going to do this, but we're also going to take some time to do this. Mm-hmm. And that's around making sure that our teachers are, I know we're pushing hard. So let's make sure that they know that we appreciate the work that they're doing. Yep. Let us take a minute to do a temperature reading of the room and make sure that they're okay because we are pushing, just like we did during COVID. Like that was, I don't have to explain that to anybody because we've all lived through it. We know it's some of the hardest work that we did was, from our couches on a computer screen. Right. And so in those moments of my own self-reflection and isolation, been able to think about what do our teachers need, and not about staying in the game, but about making sure they're healthy enough to be in the game at all. Yeah. And so, either from a cognitive side or an emotional side or just mental health and their well-being. So it's sometimes really easy to lose sight of that when you've got community members with expectations, when you've got board members with expectations, and you've laid out a plan, and they're going to hold you accountable to that plan. It's sometimes a little risky to be like, we're going to, I want everybody to feel really good about themselves and not worry about what the data says right now. But that's important. And those moments that we've gotten the best feedback in terms of, this was a great professional learning day. Yeah. I learned a lot, and I felt really appreciated, have happened for me or have been created for me in moments of isolation.
Yeah. There was an analogy when we started creating this model where we said, if you're a sports player, so let's say you're on the football team, you don't go out during game time and do push-ups for the crowd. And, we've had people, because we have it actually written down on our tabletop, and people come over and say, what's this? This says push-ups aren't part of the game. That's our phrase. And we're like, oh, and they'll read that and they'll say, what does that mean? And I said, well, everybody expects that the football player is going to be strong when you go out to play the game. And how they do that is they do their own gym time, right? They do their own time where they're not playing the game. And this is that moment where they can come out and actually build those strengths and build the capacity and build. So when you go out on the field at game time, you can play the game. Yeah. And so with any organization, the question becomes what is the organizational equivalent of gym time? And so this is where we're saying, well, I think it's this moment of like, there's moments of retreat, there's moments of isolation where you're doing your push-ups on your own, or maybe you're doing that like spin class in the retreat. And we can kind of make this analogy, because then the expectation of the community is when you're in the game that you're an A player and you've got your team is coming together and really producing great results. But on the same side, it's kind of like you can't expect the football team to literally play football for an audience on national television all the time. Right? We can't. So I think we need to give ourselves that grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And I think that has to come from a place that people think that you're connecting with them from where they are.
Yes.
Too. So, I hate to say it, because it's kind of cliche that it ebbs and flows, but it certainly does. However, if you're not purposeful about those things, it's, they've got to be strong enough to be in the game.
Yeah. Too much time in the game, stress, right? Too much time in isolation, no progress. And too much time retreating, probably had a lot of fun, but we didn't make progress.
Right, exactly. So it's this, you know, it really is kind of this push and pull that you've got to do and manage. And I think probably that's what really effective, compassionate, empathetic leaders do.
Yeah.
They understand those three things and how that all works. Because the other thing is, like, I always said, as you know, I coached for a long time, and coaching doesn't happen during a game either. You know what I mean?
Right?
So you've got to spend time in those other areas, because that they don't hear what you're saying in the heat of the battle, or so that has to happen prior to and separate of sometimes the game.
Yeah. Great. Time always goes fast.
It does.
Yep. And so this was great. Love to hear your insights on these 3 states. And I look forward to, at some point, you'll come back and say, gosh, we were really thinking about these 3 states that we talked about and how we use them. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always good to be here.
Yep.
And sometimes I think just like when you are able to talk through the things that we take for granted, like I feel like I'll go back tomorrow. Like I feel this is a little bit of a retreat for me. So
absolutely. Good.
I'll go back tomorrow and get in the game.
All right. You do that.
All right,
Thanks,
great.
Cori.
Thank you.
Yep.